Slide deck up and running.
Well, good morning and welcome everybody to the Excellence Through Quality Improvement Projects E-QIP Data Literacy Webinar, Unlock the Power of Data webinar series. This session is titled Unlocking Data Insights and Unveiling Key Performance Metrics. And we're very happy that you could all join us today. We would like to begin today's webinar with a land acknowledgement, and I will pass it over to Alex Clement from CMHA Sudbury Manitoulin to open the meeting with her land acknowledgement.
Good morning. I would like to begin this gathering by acknowledging that my virtual workplace is located on the traditional territory of the Tikmikishing, Anishinaabeg, and the Wanapate First Nations. This land is located within the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory. I wish to thank the First Peoples who have cared for this land for thousands of years and are grateful for the opportunities to work together towards true health, equity, and reconciliation. With that, I would like to share that in 2023, 0 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action were completed, and 8 years since the release of the 94 calls to action, 81 calls remain unfulfilled. I invite everyone to visit the Yellowhead Institute's 2023 status update on reconciliation to learn how we as service providers can do more to contribute to reconciliation. Please consider the traditional territory you are located on and feel free to offer your own land acknowledgement in the chat if you choose.
Thank you, Alex. So, hi everyone. I'm Noshima Degani. I am one of the co-leads for the Excellence Through Quality Improvement Project. I want to give you a bit of background on the webinar series. So this webinar series, we started it with the intention of providing community mental health and addictions providers and others in the mental health and addiction sector with information, education, resources around data literacy, but also to be able to highlight innovations that are happening across the province in different agencies on trying to start to embed use of measurement, use of reporting, use of indicators in the work that they do. So the purpose of this series is really to increase understanding of data and data literacy and to advance everyone's ability to use data to improve the planning and delivering of their services. In this 4th series, what we're going to hear from our participant, Alex Clement, is the value and importance of regular analysis and monitoring of key performance indicators, understanding the role of subject matter experts in effective performance evaluation, and to learn how to practically review and develop and review performance metrics as an organization. These are important areas for all of us to be starting to advance because as you know, as a sector, we are moving forward fairly quickly with getting to standardized data, getting to common measurement. And what we really want to be able to do is to leverage that for our own understanding of how we're performing, but also to be able to tell our data stories. In terms of the importance of data literacy, this slide comes from the first in the series, in the webinar series, where Dr. Derek Chechak kicked us off with Data Literacy 101. We've continued to use this slide in subsequent presentations to ground us in the answer in the question, why data literacy? The underlying theme of these webinars is that data literacy is increasingly pivotal in a rapidly evolving digital landscape. In an era dominated by information, where it's easy to find and often be overwhelmed by the amount of data and data sources, understanding how to navigate, interpret, and harness this information is not just a skill, but a necessity. It's also a very practical tool that we need to be implementing for our organizations. So think of data literacy as a critical skill, a practical resource, and a communication tool. As such, the basic concepts that are needed to interpret this language become increasingly important. Data informs local and regional planning, system efficiency, and measurement-based care. Examples of the use of data include things like OHT dashboards, Ontario's structured psychotherapy reporting tools, OCAN reports. As a sector, we're fast implementing the PDS, and more agencies are mining their own data to better understand who they serve and how. The increasing focus on progress and outcome monitoring or measurement-based care requires accurate data to demonstrate performance at the client and organization level. In many ways, we have an opportunity to think better than what was built for other sectors. We can focus on measurement and on measuring what matters to our clients. We're building culture, and in a culture that embraces quality improvement, accountability, data, and data, we should be using data to monitor performance, track changes before and after an intervention is implemented, and transparently share information with boards of directors, funders, and the public. Data literacy skills allow us to create outputs from these data like tables, charts, graphs, scorecards, dashboards. But it also allows us to understand outputs created by others. It helps us to understand where the data originated, how it was collected, what the limitations of the data are, and how it can be visualized and analyzed. Data is power, and so is your ability to understand it. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter. Alex Clement is the Coordinator of Quality Improvement and Privacy Officer at CMHA Sudbury, Manitoulin. Alex has spent 10 years supporting both the child and youth and adult mental health sectors, and she also spent a couple of years as a quality improvement coach with E-QIP. She has a passion for QI and policy work, and Alex is currently pursuing her PhD in health quality from Queen's University. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Noshaba. I will advance the slide here. So no need to, I think, go over the objectives again because Noshaba already highlighted on those, but they are here in the slide deck if anybody wants to refer back to them. So first, to kind of kick things off, I offer kind of a prompt to get people thinking. So the topic of the presentation is on performance measurement, and just wanted to get a sense from those in the audience, what is it that performance measurement means to you? And if you just want to add a couple words in the chat or maybe share some thoughts. Get everybody's brain going. Measuring whether your intervention is helpful or not, absolutely. Target reports, are we meeting the target? 100%. Opportunity to assess efficacy and effectiveness, looking at gaps, all excellent suggestions. Knowledge mobilization and knowledge transfer. So once we have the information, what are we doing with it? Oh, love the suggestion around monitoring programs to restart PDSA cycles, absolutely. So while those are kind of wheeling in, and please keep them coming, I'd like to kind of just share the definition that I'm hoping to guide today's presentation to sort of set the context. So this particular definition is from the Performance Measurement for Agriculture, Agri-Food, and Economic Development Organization's Guidebook, which is actually an amazing resource put out by the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food, and Rural Affairs. They seem to really have a good handle on performance measurement. So they define performance measurement as the process used to assess the efficiency and effectiveness of projects, programs, and initiatives. It is a systematic approach to collecting, analyzing, and evaluating how on track a project program is to achieve its desired outcomes, goals, and objectives, which I think touches on several of what folks shared into the chat there. So that's fantastic that we're all kind of already on the same page. So in summary, they share performance measurement is typically done by an organization to demonstrate accountability, support decision-making, and overall improve processes. With that, would love to have folks consider and share how it is that you're engaging your organization in accountability reporting. And if you're maybe perhaps not the one doing the engaging, how have you been engaged in accountability reporting and performance measurement at your organization? While we're all thinking about that, the big why around use of performance measurements. So I think folks have already started hinting on what performance measurement is and why we would be using it. But of course, one of the primary benefits of regular performance measurement is that it helps to inform decisions. It means a plan can be adjusted mid-course, or if priorities need to be reset to take advantage of emerging opportunities. So that, again, kind of the emphasis on the regular performance measurement, so we can sort of catch things as we go, before 6 months have passed and we realize, like, oh, maybe things aren't as on track as we thought. So an internal performance measurement system will drive results and enable an organization to learn from its successes and failures. I see in the chat folks have shared that they're sometimes the ones providing the data for discussion, trying to measure different programs to make sure the interventions are on track. Wonderful. So got several kind of benefits outlined on the slide here, and would love to have folks kind of pop in the chat which of these benefits resonates most with you as we go through them. So other benefits of performance measurement include creating buy-in, of course, through the partners and invested parties, setting goals and targets together. So getting everybody kind of involved in that discussion. Develops best practices and lessons learned that can be applied to future initiatives or used to sort of, again, the mention of PDSA cycles. So check, adjust the initiative you're currently working on based on the data that you're receiving. Also helps increase accountability by demonstrating the effectiveness and value of plans and activities and achieving desired goals and outcomes. Informs that decision-making process that could revolve around, budgeting and resource allocation in an environment where, as we know, resources are often limited. Also helps to demonstrate and document changes over time. Helps us to communicate an organization's data story, and develops relationships through engaging stakeholders and building a common understanding of the process. And I've put a box around helping to communicate an organization story because I think you'll find that that is sort of the theme I went with for the majority of this presentation. So folks sharing which ones resonate most, informing decision-making, increasing accountability resonates with me since we were all providing healthcare 100% and all of the above. Fabulous. Glad that we're hitting the mark with some of those. So there's absolutely no one right way to plan for performance measurement, but figured I'd give, offer a model for folks to consider if you're ever wondering kind of where to start. So this model is another gem from the Performance Measurement for Agriculture and Agri-Food and Economic Development Guidebook. Here they outline 4 high-level steps to guide performance measurement process. Step 1 being preparing for measuring performance. So they recommend establishing a team and identifying and engaging any relevant parties. So this stage really should be an opportunity to clarify where the organization is at and where the organization would like to go in terms of their project or initiative that they're undertaking. So stage 2 being identifying outcomes using a logic model or not. But when we're talking about outcomes and considering outcomes here, that's really the desired changes, effects of the activities that are being undertaken. So at this stage, you'd want to identify the problem that needs to be addressed along with the desired outcome. So this particular framework recommends utilizing a logic model to map outcomes and other attributes, which includes inputs and activities that would be undertaken as part of the initiative or project. But in cases where the measures are predetermined, and we're going to be talking a lot about kind of accountability reporting and measures that we need to report on for funding purposes, a logic model would be less relevant because those are already sort of determined for us. Stage 3 is where you would want to start creating your performance measures. So particularly for any outputs and outcomes that have been established for your initiative or project. Again, this is kind of very high level. Thank you, Laura, for adding in the chat the link. They are all linked at the end as well. And stage 4 is the opportunity to collect, analyze, and communicate the results from the performance. So at this point, you're trying to determine, effective ways to collect and analyze data, how to report and communicate those results, because obviously once we collect the data, we don't want it just kind of living in a spreadsheet somewhere where it's not really communicated. We want to look at how to use the information gathered to improve that strategy or initiative, and are overall essentially looking to leverage our data to tell a convincing story about our results. backed by quantitative evidence in this case. We will get you the link, I promise. I was just seeing in the chat. So talked a little bit on the last slide about outcomes and measures, and you may be thinking, but Alex, aren't outcomes and measures the same thing? So they're definitely related, but not the same thing. So for example, I've included here a picture of the quintuple aim, which folks may be familiar with, the quadruple aim or the quintuple aim. These are frameworks that have been used pretty regularly right now by Ontario Health in terms of primary outcomes for a high-performing healthcare system. They're really advocating for this model. So outcomes on the left are embedded within that quintuple aims, and outcomes are really the desired effects or changes we are trying to achieve through those efforts. The measures are how we want to quantify those changes to determine whether we are having the intended impact. So here I've added some examples of how we might want to measure enhanced patient and caregiver experience. Of course, these would be developed to reflect the specific outcome goals that are the focus of the particular project or initiative that you're keeping in mind. So one example measure might be treatment retention, which you could quantify as proportion of individuals who've completed treatment, ensuring you're not seeing high levels of dropout, or if you're making changes that you're influencing or decreasing, obviously, that level of dropout. For therapeutic alliance, you might want to consider proportion of individuals who report having a good or high quality of relationship with their worker or therapist. For follow-up after discharge, proportion of individuals who have follow-up visits with a primary care doctor within 7 days of discharge after hospitalization might be a measure that you would want to consider. But again, these would obviously be catered based on the particular goal or outcome of the initiative or project, or what it is that you're trying to sort out and report on. So curious, what are some measures that your organization is currently using in terms of performance measures or would like to be exploring more? And they don't necessarily have to be related to this quintuple aim, but anything that you're measuring or reporting on a regular basis. Client wait time, that's a big one. Looking at priority populations and Ontario Health teams to provide insight on how we're performing on mental health and addictions related indicators. Definitely very timely. I know a lot of organizations on the call are likely involved in their local Ontario Health teams, like of stay in program, wait time, which are related, right? Because if you have folks that are staying in program for long periods of time, that may increase wait time. Staff wellness, another great one. Key maps to see the areas to provide support. Ooh, I will have to talk more with Jacqueline about heat maps. That's fantastic. So obviously, folks are exploring performance measures in all kinds of different avenues of our work, and many of them are aligned with this quintuple aim. So that's pretty fabulous. And of course, this is where I kind of plug when considering those measures. You always want to go through that process of developing measures and considering that you're using SMART principles. I know folks are probably likely familiar with this, but when we think SMART, we're talking about specific, making sure that your goal is very specific in nature, kind of setting like the tone of an operational definition. So everybody, once they see the measure, they sort of understand what it is exactly that you're trying to measure. So if we're talking wait times, do we mean, from referral to entry into program? If we're talking about referral, is it like the date the fax was received, or is it the date we had first contact? Making sure that that's really well operationalized in your measure. We want to make sure, of course, it's measurable, so something that we can quantify. And understanding how to measure it, like if it's a matter of pulling a report from your client management system, what that looks like, or if you're surveying folks, making sure you can get information that way. When you set a goal, you want to ensure that it's attainable. We do love to talk about kind of stretch goals, but we never want to set ourselves up for failure. So making sure that, it is going to be attainable, relevant. So you want to make sure the measure is relevant to the outcome that you're trying to achieve, and time bound in the sense that you want to not only be monitoring it regularly, but having, if it's tied to a specific project or initiative, you want to make sure that that measure is appropriately reflecting that time period that you have, whether it's 6 months, a year, or even if it's something ongoing, just making sure that everybody is sort of the same understanding. I love the quote from Donald Berwick, who talks about "some is not a number, soon is not a time," and keeping that in mind when kind of putting our measures and goals in place. So now that we've kind of got the context around performance measurements out of the way, this is where I'd like to talk a little bit more about some of the strategies that my organization has utilized to help us along our performance measurement journey. Going forward, a lot of the examples I will be providing are rooted in the context of an Ontario Health-funded adult mental health service provider. However, I tried to keep the approaches and strategies broad enough that anything shared today could be applied to an organization that is or wants to conduct performance measurement. And I think Laura mentioned it earlier, but please feel free to pop questions in the chat as we go along. So I just want to add a disclaimer to this particular slide. So I am by no means an English major, psych actually. So please don't be mad at me if I was overly generous with the use of some of these literary terms for the purposes of creating what I hope to be a helpful mnemonic going forward. So the approaches outlined here are quite interrelated. So some of the following strategies I go through may address more than one approach. They've just been categorized like this for the sake of simplicity. But for the next few slides, hoping to touch on 3 kind of approaches to support telling your story with data. So first and foremost, you want to make sure that you have the right people in the room. So I call this the characters. For there, you want to ensure everyone's on the same page. We're going to call that the setting. And then third, we're going to prioritize frequent reporting and review, which helps us build our plot. So if you think characters, setting, and plot, you should be able to tell your data story effectively. So strategy number 1, considering the characters, having the right people in the room. So again, kind of speaking from the experiences I've had at CMHA Sudbury Manitoulin, you always want to identify those who have direct involvement in the work, kind of referring to those as our subject matter experts, both in the clinical and the analytical side of things. So those not involved need not to apply. And I emphasize both the clinical, and again, that's assuming it's, program or intervention related. If it's a project that focuses on, finance, your subject experts would be those that work most closely with that process. But also the folks that should be part of the conversation are those that are pulling the data, that have an understanding of, the data source, how that data has been operationalized, so that you can have the most fulsome conversation to make sure that, again, that there's a common understanding, and that if there are questions about data and how that number, where did it come from, that it can be answered in the moment, and it's not a matter of kind of like circling back. So to that end, you want to update attendance requirements as needed. There's been times where just kind of operationally, we've had managers or coordinators transition from program to program, though they might have some of the historical understanding. Once they're kind of no longer the subject matter expert for that particular measurement that we're talking about, we kind of just, politely ask them to no longer attend those meetings, because we do want to keep it as focused as possible. And that means that we want to keep it relevant. From there, just to make sure that, if you are meeting to discuss performance measures, that you're sharing the measures and performance in advance so everyone can have a chance to prepare for that discussion. Again, to make sure that you're having an effective and efficient use of time, and that that the discussion, again, will be pretty fruitful and folks are prepared. From there, kind of segue into the next strategy around the setting. So ensuring everyone is on the same page. This is probably my favorite one because I know there's been many instances where we may think that everybody has an understanding of what it is that we're trying to measure or achieve, only to find out that that's not the case. And it's something that can really easily be corrected for. So the first one, the first kind of strategy I set out here for ensuring everyone is on the same page is to lean on operational definitions. So either find existing ones or create your own. So kind of some of the examples I'll be providing later about how we've applied these strategies revolve around our reporting to our funder, so Ontario of Health, around our mental health and service programs. So our kind of operational definitions are rooted in the Ontario Healthcare Reporting Standards for Community Mental Health and Addictions. So that is kind of like the guidebook. If I have any lack of understanding around what a visit is, I am going back to that guide to say, okay, how does the ministry define this? What does that mean in terms of how we're pulling that data from our own client management system, making sure that it is reflective of the definition and being able to articulate that to our subject matter experts to say, you know, visit is XYZ. It's something meaningful interaction that exceeds 5 minutes and that it is had with the service recipient or a significant other of theirs, and just kind of outlining it from there. And we often go back to our operational definitions just to remind folks what it is, because we want to make sure that we're all sort of talking the same language. To that end, definitely utilize a measurement plan to define measures and how data is collected based on those operational definitions. And I'll share an example one on the next slide. And from there, really recommend developing standardized templates for reporting any performance data. And this really helps kind of eliminate any surprises and also builds familiarity with those folks that are often being engaged in this conversation. They kind of know where to find things, making sure they become familiar with the terminology and the process of the review overall. Here is an example of a measurement plan that you can use. So again, anything that is a template that can be found online, I've linked in the slide deck, which I know is going to be provided. And there's a slide at the end that has some of the resources. I'm not trying to gatekeep anything here. Definitely want to make these as available for folks as possible. So this is kind of a very typical measurement plan. So first column, you would indicate the measure. I gave the example of visits or, you know, unique individuals served, or if it's project related and you want to measure wait times, that sort of thing, that would go in the first column. Measure type, this is more related to quality improvement projects specifically, but you can outline whether it's an outcome, process, or balancing measure. You would want to define the numerator and denominator if it is a proportion. So what's that number at the top of the fraction mean? If it's individuals served, is it, you know, unique individuals as of April 1? And the denominator, the bottom number of the fraction, is it, you know, all folks served from the agencies, it folks served in a particular program or service. You want to set your goal or target using those SMART principles. And then there's the data collection guidance. So definitely a very important column where you want to set out sample, frequency, data source, any kind of nuances that you want everybody to have in mind when reviewing the information, and who that information would be either recorded by or extracted by, to kind of give an idea of the roles and responsibilities around that particular data. Our next strategy is the plot, so prioritizing frequent reporting and review. And I know that kind of sounds straightforward, but in my experience, what I've found to be a little bit more successful is just establishing regular reporting intervals. And we have dedicated meetings, and I am sending out those meeting invites a year in advance. It is a series, it is every third Tuesday of the month. Folks know to expect it, and they aren't, you know, creating conflicts for themselves. Everybody's able to attend because it's just something that folks anticipate when it comes time to talk about our accountability metrics. Where possible, you want to try and embed your review into existing workflows. If possible, you want to ensure dedicated time and resources for those that are needed to be part of that discussion. So for us, we have a decision support specialist that is the one extracting all the data and creating kind of our measurement plan with the targets and everything in it. And we need to ensure that that person has time on a regular basis to be able to pull and create those reports, distribute them well in advance so folks can review them prior to the meetings. We also want to make sure that, you know, that the time commitment is available there where for those that need it. And then again, where possible, if you can use automated reporting tools to make sure things are flowing on that regular interval without kind of human intervention needed, because hey, people go on holidays, things change, then definitely leverage those where possible. So if you have dashboards, things like that, you want to make sure that they're, you know, working properly, they're connected and pulling the data properly, and that they are shared with those that are going to be part of those conversations. So just kind of an example how we used some of those strategies to have a more fulsome conversation. You can see here one data set, 2 stories on here. So the graph on the top is actually from one of our dashboards, our incident reporting dashboard. And as me, kind of the person that looks at data and doesn't necessarily have the clinical context to determine, you know, what exactly is going on here on a bigger scale, I would look at this data and I'd say, great, like we are trending a decrease in incidents reported between 2019 and 2023. Fabulous. We see some peaks there, but overall, we're looking at a decline in the trend. Whereas when I engage the appropriate subject matter expert, so keeping in mind our characters, this particular graph, both again, same data set, but on the bottom, we're talking to my coordinator of shelter services because these are incidents from shelter services. We're talking about, you know, operationally defining what these are. So these are all incidents, whether near misses, adverse events, sentinel events. So all levels of severity are included in here. And then we kind of got talking about what exactly is going on here. So keeping that sort of plot in mind. Coincidentally, the biggest fluctuations in incidents in this bottom graph, you can see them circled, are landed on the ends of quarters. So they are represented in the top graph. However, the top graph is only quarterly versus the bottom graph is monthly. So you can see kind of more fluctuations because we're talking about that regular reporting. We see, you know, June, that seasonal peak. Otherwise, if we were only reporting monthly, key changes in performance might be obscured. But you know, showing this data on the bottom to my coordinator of shelter services, I can say, I see that the trend is on a decrease, but what exactly is happening in here? And we were able to kind of annotate it to see, you know, why some of the big fluctuations were happening. You can see again on the bottom graph, April to September 2019. At the time, the shelter was only open in the winter, fall, spring months. So between the summer, there was no operations. Of course, we're not seeing any incidents there. You can see December 2019, first month at a new location, a little bit of a peak compared to that previous performance in terms of increased number of incidents. Then as we go along, April to November 2020, that was the first summer we'd switched to 365-day operations. It was also coincided with the pandemic. We had a temporary relocation from our downtown location to a local hotel to be able to support physical distancing. And that was just a difficult time for many folks that were accessing the shelter. We were seeing a lot of behaviors, a lot of incidents that were occurring due to that kind of period of time. Again, it coincided with relocation. We weren't sure if, you know, kind of displacing people maybe had an impact on behaviors. Here it looks like it may have. From there, in December 2020, the shelter went back to its original location. We do see kind of a little bit of a decline in the performance. But again, June every year we see a peak, and I'm not sure if that's because of the warmer weather or what have you, but in 2021, June 2021, we said something has to be done here. We're seeing these behaviors. It was particularly outside of shelter during the periods where folks were waiting right before the shelter opened, where people were kind of like, jostling to get in. It was warm, people are tired at the end of the day, and we were seeing, some more escalated behaviors happening there. So based on this data, September 2021, we contracted additional security to support that front entrance, and we saw a corresponding decrease in the behaviors, which is fantastic. And it's something that we've more or less maintained since then. So a good news story to end it all. But circling back to my original point, as somebody who's just looking at numbers of incidents, I didn't have all that context. So once I was able to sort of engage the appropriate people, have that conversation, get a good understanding of what was going on, the context could be provided, and it creates much more of a story than just saying, hey, we've seen a decrease in incidents. Maybe for us, we can kind of figure out why and when that was happening. To which point, wondering if any of the previous strategies related to, the character, plot, or setting stood out for folks. And if so, feel free to pop it into the chat. Maybe something that you're already doing, maybe something you'd like to try going forward. And if you're like, hey, Alex, this is all really common sense, I don't know why you're telling us that, then that's okay too. So would love to hear back from folks.
Hey, Alex, can I share a story that we heard recently from one of our QI projects through E-QIP?
I would love that. Go ahead, Noshba.
I'm pretty sure it was CMHA Kenora. I don't think I'm telling anything outside of what's allowable, because it is one of their QI projects. They had started a QI project with one of their shelter programs, because they were seeing a lot of incidents happening outside the shelter, and were recognizing that this was resulting in like they were having critical incidents happening, violent incidents, and we're trying to figure out. And so the data helped them to see that they were seeing changes in the numbers. They were concerned about that. One of their strategies turned out to be because the shelter had specific open hours, and a lot of the incidents that were happening outside the doors as people were waiting to come into the shelter. So they put a clock outside the shelter and realized that people didn't know what time the doors were actually opening, but by putting a clock outside the shelter, they were able to track the change that intervention had, and it actually resulted in reductions in the number of incidents, because people now knew, oh, the reason the doors aren't open is because the shelters aren't open yet. So it's a combination of a PDSA cycle and the use of data to be able to track something. I'm sure I'm not telling the story very well. I think if Lucy's on, I'm sure she could give a better, or if anyone from CMHA Kenora is on, I'm sure they could give a much better summary of it. But I was really impressed with just how they were using data to say, okay, something's going on, and then looked at their circumstance to say that there was a problem. And then through the quality improvement coaching they received through E-QIP, they were able to actually go work through a PDSA cycle and use the data to track the improvement. So again, very really nice way of using data to start identifying a problem, but also then to tell the story.
Yeah, fabulous. And I think you brought up an excellent point where we do performance measurement sometimes because we feel that we have to, but because of that regular measurement, it often indicates where quality improvement efforts are needed, and gives us a way kind of already built in to see the impact of those quality improvement measurements. Fantastic. Thank you, Noshba. Oh, and somebody said great summary in there. So fantastic. Okay, and so as people are kind of, ruminating on those kind of strategies that we shared around the characters, the setting, and the plot, and what they may want to try or have tried and it's already been working really well for them, feel free to continue adding that to the chat. Loving the discussion that's going on. But just wanted to point out the last chart that I showed was some time series data. So kind of your typical line graph where it was just plotted monthly quantity over time, nothing too fancy. So anybody with an Excel program can do that with a kind of YouTube tutorial. So don't count yourself short if you feel like, oh, I don't know Excel. Definitely something that's doable. Other ways to share your data story are, using distribution curves, looking at correlation. So correlation is really relationship between two factors. Does the duration of service, time spent in program impact wait times? Is it a negative or positive correlation? You can do that with just a scatter plot. And I know more and more our sector is trying to get towards a place where we've got dashboards that have multiple or one or two of these types of ways that we're sharing data, so that people can just have a quick glance and have data at their fingertips to see what's going on in their programs or services or with a quality improvement project. So just some suggestions there. And that kind of brings me to the CMHA Sudbury Manitoulin story, how performance measurement has sort of evolved in my time here anyways, which has only been 4 short years, but there was a pandemic in there, so it maybe seems a little bit longer than that. But definitely want to keep the conversation in the chat, and if anything here that I'm saying resonates with folks, feel free to pop it in the chat. Thank you, Lucy. See that you love the slide. I actually have a whole scroll, like a whole Star Wars scroll. This is the only part that would fit on the page. I'll have to share it for my data enthusiast friends because it is quite humorous. So in the beginning, a long time ago, pre-pandemic, in a not so far away CMHA, we identified that there was a need to have ongoing discussions regarding our performance on ministry mandated measures of performance related to our accountability agreements. And again, I know not everybody here necessarily has those same accountability agreements, but I suspect we're all kind of funded by somebody, and we all have funder relationships that we have to report on to make sure that the money we're being provided is being used for what it's intended. And we really wanted to have an opportunity to review performance and any deviation from our goals that was going to be reported on a quarterly basis to Ontario Health. Obviously, no one will be blindsided by unexpected performance the day that things are due to be submitted. So the idea was that on a monthly basis, we had these 1-hour monthly meetings scheduled with the entire leadership team. We're not a huge organization. It is about 20 people though. And we talked about 6 functional centers, so funding pockets, one being like case management, another being residential services, another being our addictions centers. And just over the course of that 1 hour, we went through all of our metrics that were outlined in our accountability agreement, kind of one by one. And as we went through it, the manager of that program, it was like, you're up. So here's our performance. We're either within target or not. If we're not, tell us what's going on. So folks, I think, really felt that they were being put on the spot. We had a lot of people in there. It was only an hour. So to go through kind of line by line, each item was very time consuming. So we had the right idea around frequency, meeting monthly, but we were really missing the mark on having the right folks at the table. Like everybody was just kind of overkill. Sometimes, if your program wasn't really performing well based on the targets, folks felt not really inclined to share reasons for that in front of their colleagues, or they were, again, kind of like not necessarily expecting that was the case. So we also had this template that we went through. It was virtual meetings. We did a screen share, not the most user-friendly template. A lot of numbers here, which I think threw people off for the most part. And then we'd have a column for our variance explanations that we type out in the meeting. But again, not ideal. So kind of mentioned some of the challenges already, but there was no dedicated time for each program or functional center, which made the conversation remain very high level. Folks didn't always feel inclined to share in front of everybody, including like the CEO. We often ran out of time and couldn't get to everybody. So it was a matter of then trying to schedule like post hoc meetings to hit the ones that we missed, or, just not ideal. So really ended up, we had a bit of a disconnect, no sense of ownership over these performance measures. And it overall wasn't coming across as a priority as we tried to scramble to fit folks in or follow up via email. From there, we decided to sort of rejig things. We figured out what the challenges were, and we decided from there on we were going to do shorter meetings. So 30-minute monthly meetings with a very focused group. So the folks on the invite were the coordinator, which is kind of the frontline supervisor of the service or program, their manager, the clinical director for the clinical programs, and the corporate director for the corporate services, as well as 2 members of the quality and data team. Again, kind of getting that like data expertise as to where this information was coming from in terms of how it was pulled from our client information system. Those are sort of the folks that were most familiar with the operational definitions, how information was collected, that sort of thing. And we moved to more of a quality improvement plan template. And the idea there was kind of to Noshba's earlier point that we're doing this performance management, but if we start to see any sort of variances that are trending in a way that we don't like, we could quickly then flip it to a quality improvement project where we were outlining, change ideas, who was responsible for that change idea, how we were going to measure if the change idea was working. And it was just an easy sort of transition to make using this template. So the other reason we had both members of our quality data team in there is that our decision support specialist was sort of on standby and could support with any like ad hoc data pulling. So here we have an example of visits. If we wanted to dig a little bit deeper in that 30-minute time, we had the client management system guru on the call to kind of say, yep, this is where we're seeing this number being contributed from. This, maybe is what we're seeing here. And it really allowed that focused, dedicated meeting to go into greater detail about the particular performance for each one of those programs. So wondering, what, if any, methods are others using to track performance measures? We use Excel. I know there's dashboards and that sort of thing out there, but would like to kind of get an understanding of if people are keeping it low tech or high tech, because like I said, this is what we're using, and we're always looking to kind of, adjust if we need to. Excel, SQL, BI dashboards, but mostly Excel. Love it. Same. We dabble in BI dashboards. But I mean, there's just something undeniable about Excel. Excel target reports move to Power BI target reports. Look at it. Smartsheet. Oh, nice. I'm familiar. Have not used it myself. But as those come in, I will advance the slide here. So once we rejigged it to this other process of the focused, having those subject matter experts in the room, shorter meeting duration, but very dedicated. The challenge that we ran into with these being monthly is that by Q4, so keeping in mind we have an April to March fiscal year. So by January, February, or March, we're finding the discussion around where there was variances was becoming very repetitive. So, I just think of, we talk about bed days in our residential program. If you get behind in bed days, it's really almost impossible to catch up because you're not going to open up new beds in your program to sort of make up the difference. So, if somebody's explained we had to limit intakes because of the pandemic, for example, that obviously didn't change for longer durations. So sometimes the conversations were even becoming repetitive by the third quarter. So, your October, November, December. But as I would like to point out to many of those that would mention how repetitive the conversation was coming, I'd say you say that like it's a bad thing, because the idea, the whole goal of this monthly kind of meeting to be able to discuss performance was that nobody wanted to be blindsided. We wanted to have a really firm understanding of what was going on in those measures and our program performance. So if we had a really good handle on that by the third or fourth quarter, that to me was definitely a benefit and not necessarily a challenge. So next, I'm actually going to present three more concrete scenarios that arose due to our application of those changes to our process, and kind of refer back to some of the strategies that I outlined earlier and kind of identify how those were beneficial. So scenario one, we finally had the right people in the room. So the first example was that we saw a decrease in our not uniquely identified service recipients. So those are folks that didn't have a formal record in our client management system. So, you know, we can say they were Joe Smith and have a kind of a full file, but it was somebody who was often accessing brief services, didn't want to sign like an ongoing service contract. So we would just kind of capture them as not uniquely identified individual each time they came in and interacted with our intake staff. So that was showing up in our info referral functional center. But when we were kind of scratching our head around why we were seeing this just decrease, because people were obviously still attending our intake services and brief services, we noticed through this kind of regular review that on the flip side, our case management functional center was seeing a corresponding increase in individuals served. So that would be the unique individuals served. And once we had a chance to speak to the manager of those programs, the manager walked us through some changes that they'd made to the service delivery model, where they were really trying to do more screeners and assessments right at the get-go with individuals accessing our intake brief to support service matching, to make sure that they were a good fit, to assess readiness. And because they were applying these formal screeners and assessments, they were creating a file right away for folks. So they were getting a service agreement, kind of being able to have that conversation with individuals around, this is why we're kind of engaging you in these screeners. You know, we want to make sure that we're putting you in the program that's going to benefit you most. And like I said, we got those service agreements and files were opened right away. So people were no longer not uniquely identified. So on one hand, it looks like, you know, we were below targets, like what's going on here, only to see that it was actually a good thing, where we were getting people to tell their story once, we were doing screeners, we were service matching. It was all actually a really positive thing. And then kind of a second scenario where we made sure that everyone was on the same page. We saw a massive increase in number of visits. So again, kind of those 5+ minute interactions that are had with individuals or one of their significant support people in our diversion and court support functional center, which is justice programs, things like release from custody, court outreach, mental health diversion. And I'm talking like a 200% increase in visits. It was just kind of astronomical. But we did find that after some discussion with the coordinator and manager of that program, that it coincided with some updates and some training we did around how basically time entry was done in our client management system. So we did a lot of investment in educating people around what's considered like a direct interaction, what's considered indirect interaction. And we learned from the supervisor that workers had been previously capturing all their time in court. So again, court workers who would stand in court and support individuals when they were, you know, going before a judge or bail or sentencing, had been capturing that just in admin, which is kind of the bucket where I like to say that the bucket where time kind of goes to die, because it doesn't get tracked for anything other than it's just like a bucket of admin work. It's not applied to any individuals in terms of visits or that sort of thing. So once workers realized that the time they were doing supporting individuals in court was considered direct time, we saw this like massive increase in visits, which although, you know, not kind of your typical interaction, it's not like an intervention necessarily, it is a very important component of those particular services where folks are standing in court and they have their mental health support with them. So again, kind of a good news story. Once we got over the initial shock of seeing this huge increase, we were able to talk to those folks about, you know, what is a visit, what constitutes as direct time. And once we had everybody kind of that same understanding, we knew where that increase was coming from. From there, kind of my third and final scenario, a little bit different from a regular clinical program, but we witnessed, you know, due to our frequent reporting and review of our health promotion service statistics, which are things like groups, group participants, and again, kind of like not uniquely identified service recipient interactions, we were seeing a lot of seasonal trends in those particular programs. As you can imagine, things usually die down a little bit in the summer, but we would see kind of towards that like third and fourth quarter, we're getting to the end of the year. These are the stats that we're going to be reporting to the ministry and in terms of our performance for the entire year. We were seeing usually our not uniquely identified service recipient interactions was quite low, but having been doing this for quite a while now, we knew that we had things like our OHL game day events that happen January, February, March of every year that were always incredibly well attended, and it would shoot those numbers into target or even above in some cases. So it really alleviated the anxiety going into that like third and fourth quarter where we knew you would see that performance wasn't quite where we wanted it to be, but we weren't inclined to start planning more and more events that we wouldn't normally do because we knew based on those seasonal trends, we can anticipate that big influx coming in kind of the last 3 months of the reporting year. So yeah, definitely an opportunity to kind of use this information to allocate our resources appropriately. We knew we didn't have to like start holding more events or anything like that because we knew what to expect. Now we also kind of use this information to look at where our health promotion opportunities that we end up turning down kind of land throughout our year and that sort of thing, because we only have so many resources to hold these events. And then we're eventually hoping to leverage that information to get more health promotion resources because we are seeing that there's a community need that is we can't fulfill necessarily because, you know, our promoters are already have full schedules, and now we're tracking kind of what they're turning down to say, here's the remainder of the need. So it's a lot of talking from me, but wanted to, you know, say these are some of the aha moments that I've had and my organization's had. I'm wondering if anyone else would like to share a performance measurement revelation that they've had that just kind of help things click. They can be related to the strategies that have been shared here or not. So would definitely like to open it up a little bit more and hear what others' experiences might have been, or if anything here kind of resonated with folks, just kind of a general discussion.
Alex, I have a reflection on one of your scenarios, which I want to share with everyone. Yeah. So scenario one, if you remember, was about the right people in the room and recognizing that performance was below target. So again, like you have data, you're trying to understand what's happening. And if you try to understand it on your own, it's possible that you're going to have only a limited interpretation. Having others in the room helps you to explore what some of the explanations are. And again, the one thing I want to impart is data is not the answer. Data is the beginning of the story. It is the once upon a time. And it is the question that you want to ask, and you want to try to then answer it through the narrative. And so what you walked us through is understanding not only was the data that you were reporting potentially telling you, if you had just gone and reported it, you were going to see that you were missing your target. But by actually evaluating what was happening, by trying to understand what the data were telling you, what you were able to do is you were able to take that narrative and turn it around and say, yes, we're below target on this, but the reason we're below target on this is because we're doing a better job moving people through the system rather than keeping them in that intake and referral. And so remember that as you think about your data, that it's not like, yes, you have to report performance on many of these areas, but by having the right people in the room, by having discussions, and by using your data and being curious about your data, you can start potentially using that to tell a different story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Narshba, for picking up on that too. Like, it ended up being this really beautiful story about how we're attempting to be more person-centered as well, and keeping folks from having to retell their story to multiple workers by creating files as soon as we can to have, progress notes and assessments linked to these folks, and being able to do service matching and warm handoffs like early on. So yeah, what kind of started as like a pearl clutching moment where we're like, oh my God, we got to explain why we're not doing what we're saying we're supposed to be doing. It really was a way to kind of leverage, like, oh, we're actually doing a great job here. Cool. Well, I'm gonna take the silence in the chat. Oh wait, hold on. Patrick's got one in there under the wire. Going back to session number 1, I keep re-emphasizing that we need reliable and valid measures that are vetted and used by the right people at the table. Just getting the frontline staff and leadership focused on making sure we are measuring what we're trying to measure. 100%. Again, I know I keep saying that, but I think you really nailed it in terms of, I talked about kind of the operational measures, definitions that we lean on, but those aren't the only ones. And as an organization, we can set our own. It just making sure that everybody has got that common understanding, and that we're able to leverage the information that we're collecting to tell our story and make sure that we're achieving the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. I think it can be dangerous to try and fill in context-wise of metrics, and a challenge at our organization to review data and fill in the blanks with assumptions and possible bias. It's an excellent point, and that's another reason why we want to have the subject matter experts at the table, like the right folks at the table. There's also opportunities to kind of triangulate data. So it's one thing to just kind of look at, visits in a bubble, but we try to also look at things like wait times, and not just the direct service interactions, but the indirect service interactions, because so much of what our folks do is advocacy, and being able to kind of tell a broader story with all of that and trying to minimize those assumptions.
Alex, can I add to that? So Alessandra, thank you for raising that. And I think you're absolutely right. You want to be careful that you don't try to over explain your data, but I don't think that should stop you from trying to understand your data and understand what's happening in your organization. And so you're right. You're trying to strike a balance between trying to explain away performance and then also trying to understand what might be underlying it. And that's where actually linking in measurement and quality improvement come together, because when you start thinking about it not as you're trying to explain poor performance, but you're trying to use your data to guide where you have opportunities for improvement, I think you turn that in from a negative into a positive potentially, and you have the opportunity as well, I think, to again, I think a lot of this is owning our narrative. It's being able to tell the story that makes sense. And so I'm going to give you a different example from the one I gave from the one Alex shared. One of the things, and this is hopefully something that some of you are thinking about. If you're part of an Ontario Health team and you're doing a collaborative quality improvement plan, you know that the indicator that's being used for mental health and addiction is intended to measure access to community mental health and addiction services. And so right now but the way the indicator is constructed is it's measuring people who have what a first contact for mental health and addictions in the emergency department. What that means is that they come to the emergency department for a mental health and addiction related reason. And if you look back 2 years in administrative data, you are not going to see them having any contact with the healthcare system that was for mental health and addictions. But again, remember, the data that we have don't include community visits. And so if you're working within your Ontario Health team and you're trying to understand, okay, why is performance like this? Being able to add in the community data, being able to say, actually, here's, and you won't be able to go back and link it in. What you're going to be looking at is you're going to be trying to understand who in your population, if you're a community agency, has also gone to the emergency department and why. And some of this might be working with partners and working to link data or to be able to transfer people to community or to do warm handoffs. If you looked at the data on their own and you just accepted them as they are, though, you're going to miss a really important part of the story, which is that the data are limited. And I think that's always an important part of any discussions around data. They're not perfect. And what we're measuring is often not exactly what we're trying to achieve. So if you think about some of the outcomes we're able to measure, we're not able to measure everything we want. And it's important that we keep that front and center when we're thinking about how we're using our data and what it's telling us. And I would say that it's okay to add in a few different interpretations and have a conversation. And I see Patrick's got a great comment. That's exactly our challenge. We don't have timely access to OHIP billing or a complete data set. So I'm trying to improve a lot of literacy around emergency department mental health and addiction visits, since 5 of our OHT metrics for mental health and addiction are all related to them. The OHT dashboards are helpful, but we have to work closely with the community to measure at the hospital level and any other source we can gather. And I would actually encourage that you can start constructing your own measures that are telling that are a balanced measure, an alternate outcome measure, or a process measure that will tell you a bit more about what's going on. At the end of the day, remember what we're doing is we're measuring to understand what's happening, but the goal is to improve the care we're delivering for our clients. And so if you can keep putting that front and center, and if you can use that to say, this is what we need to measure, this is how we need to do good integration, and how will we know we've succeeded? So keep an eye on the measures that are your accountability measures or your quality measures that are there. Be willing to provide context around those with the data that you have that's supplementary. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
No, I appreciate a good relevant rant for certain. And the other kind of thing I was reflecting on as you were sharing that was going back to kind of like the just the benefit of the regular review and monitoring of these metrics, because and so often, kind of to the point made a little bit earlier there, it can feel like we're doing an autopsy when we look at data that's been collected over like the last year, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, well, I think that's when we, decided to switch assessment tools or something to that sense. Whereas we take out a little bit of the mystery out as we're regularly reviewing and adding comments and saying, okay, like last month, this is when we piloted this new initiative. Like, what does the data show us? And it feels a little bit less like just trying to figure out what happened, but having a good understanding of, based on time and what we were intentionally doing, this was the outcome. Okay, so with that, my summary slide. If you remember nothing else about this presentation in the last hour we just spent together, please involve those who are closest to the work. Those are your characters. Ensure everyone has a common understanding, your setting, and prioritize frequent review and discussion, making sure that you've got that plot unraveling. Data doesn't need to be another 4-letter word. Make sure you tell your story. As promised, here are the resources linked that I've used kind of throughout the presentation. I believe, again, this deck will be made available for folks. My contact information is also in here. Always love a good data conversation, so please feel free to reach out if you do have any kind of burning questions or kind of want to walk through any of those templates or anything. Definitely happy to help there. And I will pass it over. I think Laura, are you next? Is this where we do the closing slides?
That's exactly it. But I do want to pause to make sure that folks have had an opportunity to share any thoughts, any curiosities or questions or comments. I know that the chat box has been quite active today, and really thankful to all of you for participating in that way. Sometimes that feels easier to type, but if somebody is feeling inspired and would like to share into the room about what they heard today and how that is reflected in their own work, we see a lot of kudos. And Patrick, really thankful that you added in. That's such a fantastic talk today. And I agree with you 100%. I really appreciated that engagement and the conversation, and how you, Alex, have made this telling the data story a very tangible process for us to consider as we are all working in our own organizations. So before we move into kind of our closing slides, what I would like to do is just check in with folks. We're wanting to get a sense from you what you're thinking about this particular webinar. And we have 4 questions for you. And if you could just take a few minutes to answer those questions. And thank you, Patrick. Please do share. Once we send this link out afterwards, we'll definitely encourage you to do so. And if you have any suggestions, Patrick, on any topics that you think would be relevant for your leadership and your team, your organization, we would be happy to hear that. So please add that into the comment open text question in the evaluation poll. And then as you're completing that, I'm just going to move us through. We are E-QIP, and we have launched our application window for participants or organizations to receive dedicated QI and data coaching support for a project. So if you're looking at and thinking about a quality improvement initiative in your organization, we would be more than happy to speak to you about that. There is a link on the slide, and you are welcome to click on that link and fill out the short application, and you'll be connected to us through that. And this is for any community of agencies who are working on a same, on a QI project, or a specific organization working on a QI project. And if you have questions about that, if you scan this QR code here, you can register for a short mini webinar happening on June the 20th from 11 o'clock to 11:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you will have an opportunity to hear what you need in terms of an application, what kind of a project might be applicable for QI and data coaching through E-QIP, and then what resources might be required. And so we have a cute little session set up for folks if they would like to register for that. And then this series continues. And so for those of you who really appreciated this webinar, we are ramping up to present continuously into September. We have the 19th at 10 a.m. We have a session that is specifically related to building data culture and data literacy through dialogue. And we have a couple of organizations who have some stellar dashboard processes that they are going to be sharing with us. And in that, they are also going to be sharing with us some of the things that they've learned and some of the challenges they've had through that. And there's 2 different organizations with 2 different stories to tell. And so it'll be really great if presentation, and happy to have you join us for that. The registration link is live for this one. And, being planful as we are, we do have the November session set for November 21st from 1 o'clock until 2:30. So an afternoon session for those of you who would prefer an afternoon session. We can then take you through a session related to collecting and using data to drive equity plans. And this will be the first of a two-part webinar. So we have, again, another organization who is going to be sharing their work that they've been doing on equity and using different tools and building data literacy as a result of that within their organization. And so we have the objectives listed there. So if you are wanting to register for that, please do so. And then we do have governance and leadership training that is offered. So for those of you who are thinking you might want to engage your leadership in some knowledge building around quality improvement, data literacy, and kind of the role of boards of directors and the senior leaders in your organization, please reach out to us at quality@equip.ca so that we will get back to you about what that might look like. Just let us know you're interested in that training. And I believe, yes, there's a little sticker that we popped up on here is that we're booking well into 2024. So just give us a shout and we'll let you know when we might be available to do that. It is tailored training as well. So each organization gets a custom training. We also have the QI Ideas online e-course, and this course is self-guided curriculum based on the model for improvement. It incorporates a variety of learning tools, including we have a case study that is mental health and addictions based. It has videos, activities, knowledge checks. It has a course workbook as well, so you have all the tools and templates, one of them which is the measurement plan that Alex shared earlier. And we walk you through those pieces in the learning. It takes about 8 to 12 hours to complete, depending on the individual. And it is easy to enroll. You just click on the registration link and it is free. And so this is really great opportunity for those in your organization who may be new to QI and would like to have some foundational language to apply to conversations. This is a really great course to take that to the next level. And again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend with us talking about data. We're really thankful that you could come. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you hopefully in September. Enjoy your summer.